Yes, members, thank you for coming back to our YouTube channel. This is Math in Motion. Shakan is your math tutor. Members, I think you are alright and you had a good night, and this is a good morning. Members, as I promised that we shall be going through economics once again, the last part of the consumer theory. We had the first part of consumer theory where we talked about different concepts, and today now we're going to talk about the price, income, and substitution effect. Members, recall in the consumer theory, we are just concerned with indifference curves and budget lines. Now, members, if we have our consumer who is consuming commodities, two commodities, X1 and X2, let me put X2 here and X1 here. He's faced with a budget line W, and then he's faced with an indifference curve IC1, and this is the optimal quantity of X1 and X2 that a consumer will consume so as to maximize his utility. X1 and X2, this is X1 star, then an X2 star. This is what we are concerned with under consumer theory. Now, members, here we are going to talk about now what's the effect of the price change, income change, and substitution effect. How does it affect our indifference curves and our budget lines? Now, members, let us first take a case of an increase in the consumer's income. Members, if you have an increase in consumer's income, what will happen? An increase in consumer's income just shifts the budget line outwards, or a decrease in consumer's income shifts the budget line inwards, keeping the prices constant of commodities. I'm saying, if there is an increase in consumer surplus, what will happen to our budget line? If this is my original budget line, W1, and there is an increase in consumer's income, therefore my budget line will shift outwards. I'll be able to consume more commodities of X1 and X2. If X1 and X2 quantities prices I kept constant. Therefore, also, if there is a decrease in consumer's income, keeping the prices constant, what will happen to my budget line? My budget line will shift inwards, somewhere inwards like this. Just shift inwards and then outwards. To shift outwards because of an increase in price, and then to shift outwards because of a reduction so to shift outwards because of an increase in income, then to shift outwards, so inwards because of an increase, so a reduction in consumer's income. Now, members, but you know that at every indifference curve, there is at every budget line, there is an indifference curve that is assigned to the budget line, because there are many. Therefore, here we shall have very many indifference curves. Shall have, if I go this down, I have an indifference curve here. I had an indifference curve here. I also had an indifference curve. I have also an indifference curve here. Therefore, if I try to join these equilibrium points, these optimal points here, I will form what we call the income consumption curve. I think it's making sense. I'm saying once again, in consumer theory, we are just concerned with two cases: a budget line and an indifference curve. Right now, today, we want to see how the price changes, income, how the price, income, and substitution affect, like how do these indifference curves affect the price change, substitution, income, substitution, and then income. Now, I'm just giving a scenario where the consumer's income has increased and the price of commodities have kept constant. What will happen? What will happen is that a consumer's budget line will shift either outwards or inwards. To shift outwards because of an increase in price, an increase in the consumer's income, and then to shift inwards because of a reduction in consumer's income. But whenever our budget line goes, there will be an indifference curve which is tangent to it. So as I have the optimal quantities of X1 and X2 that I will be able to consume at that point. But originally, we are on indifference curve we are here, like we were, let me say we were, this is our IC not, this is our IC1, and then this is our IC2. Like we are at our IC not at this point here, we are consuming these quantities of X1 and then these quantities of X2. Now, since our income increased, what happens? I have to shift outwards to a new budget line, W1, and then this W1, there will be an indifference curve which is assigned to this new budget line, and then at this point also I will be able to have my optimal quantities of X1 and X2 that this consumer will consume. Therefore, I have an increased quantities of X2 and an increased quantities of X1 that the consumer will consume, which is as a result of increase in the income. Likewise, if there is a reduction in income, what will happen? If my income reduces and the prices are kept constant, my budget will just shift outward, will just shift inwards to this the W2. Call this on W2. My budget is going to be W2. And then what's going to happen is that my income is going to reduce to W2. And then here also I'll have an indifference curve IC1, which is tangent to this budget line I've formed W2. And then I'll have some optimal quantities of X1 and X2 that I will consume at this point. And these quantities will be less than the quantities I consumed when I was originally at W1 at this point here. Therefore, if I try to connect these points, optimal points here, I form my income consumption curve. I'm saying it's called now income consumption curve. I think we are together there. Now, the next scenario is that if income is kept constant, like we have the same income, this is change. I'm saying here I'm having change in income. This is the first scenario. Change in income, keeping prices are constant. Now let us have a second scenario now where here the income is constant, like the income is constant, but now what changes is that the price of one commodity is changing. The price of good X1 is changing, like it is increasing or decreasing. What will happen to our budget lines and our indifference curves? Now members, also here things are going to be interesting. Suppose we have our indifference curve in this way, and then this is our initial budget line, W1. We have X1 commodities here, we have X2 commodities here. Now members, if the price of X1 increases or decreases, what will happen to our budget line? Now remember members, also we have our initial indifference curve here. Taking out IC1 like here. Now what will happen when the price of X1 say decreases? When it decreases, it means that a person will have more money to consume more commodities of X1. Yes, I'm saying, take an example, X1 and X2 are commodities, which are normal goods, and the price of X1 has reduced. Therefore, it means that this person will use the same amount of money he had before to consume more X1 and X2 commodities. Therefore, his budget line will shift outwards, but coming because X1 has changed, we should just outwards like this to be just tilted the right, something like I'll have now my new difference, my new budget line coming from here to here. This is my W1. This is W1, this is W something here. And then also at this point here, I also have a new budget line at this point, which will show that I will increase the quantities of X1 and X2 I will consume. This is my IC2. This means that this is W2. I'm saying that if my price of X1 decreases, what will happen to me? That I will be able to consume more X1 commodities at the same, we using the same budget which I had. This budget line shows the same budget. W1 and W2 are the same because you have the same budget, but now what has increased that is your purchasing power for X1. You are able to consume more X1 because its prices have gone down as compared to this one. Now members, now take an example also. If we had gone this side here, now take an example. Now if price of X1 has increased, now what will happen? Therefore, this X1 commodities I will be able to consume now less. Therefore, my budget will have to tilt inwards. Therefore, I have another difference curve in between here, which is as a result of the price increase. Therefore, if price of X1 increases, I will need to reduce the quantities of X1 I'm consuming so as to have an optimal quantities of X1 and X2 that will maximize my utility. Therefore, my indifference curve will shift inwards, and then I'll have another indifference curve, my indifference curve here, IC3. And then if I try to join these optimal points here, I have my income, I have my price consumption curve. Yes, members, I think these things are familiar to you, and I just wanted to have this recap here. But now, members, our major effect today is that we want to see what will be the effect of a price change. Now, first of all, we have two effects of a price change. I want to say the effect of price change. We have two. The first thing is that when the price changes, the first effect is that when the price changes, what happens? Your income, there's going to be the change in real income. Once the effects of price change. When the price of one commodity changes, what happens first? It's going to be the first thing. What's going to happen first is going to be, I want to have something like change in real income. Real income meaning the purchasing power of the money you have, and then second, we shall have also the change in the slope of the budget line. Change in the slope of the budget line. Now, for change in real income, I've explained it that if before you are consuming, let us take a case. You have 10K as your budget. This 10K, now we have two commodities. Let us have commodity X1 and then X2. Let us call X1, call it raw chapati. Yes. And then call X2 something like, I call it tea. If in this 10K you are able to consume, let us say, if one chapati costs 5K, and then one cup of tea costs 5K, like this, let us call it 2K, and then this one also costs some amount, like 2K also. Like, if one chapati costs 2K, and then tea costs 2K, and therefore we are able to consume how many? We are able to consume, say, 3 chapatis, and then 2 cups of tea. This means that you spend 6K on chapati and you spend 4K on tea. Yes, I think this is making sense. Now, when price of chapati changes, what will happen to you? When the price of chapati changes, it means that if the price of chapati changes now from 6K to 2K, what will happen? It means that you personally have now more money with you. Like your 6K now won't buy only 3 chapatis. Now it will be able to buy how many? So I'm saying, if the price of chapati, remember it was on at 2K, 1 chapati. Now suppose the price of chapati is now to 1K. Now it means that this 6K, which could buy 3 chapatis, now has changed. Now it can buy 6 chapatis. 6 chapati can buy 6 chapati. But this 6K can buy 6 chapatis. While your 4K, your 4K can buy 2 cups of tea. 2 cups of tea. Therefore, we are seeing that my income has changed. That my 6K that could purchase only 3 chapatis now can purchase 6 chapatis because there's a price change. I think I've tried to explain this change in real income. When there's a price fall, real income increases. Real income, you say, is the purchasing power of the nominal income, and then now there's change in the slope of the budget line. Remember the slope of the budget line? Now for the slope of the budget line, the slope equals to P1 over P2. Remember, if you make the budget line, the slope is going like, okay, the budget line, W is the same as having P1, PXX plus PY, okay, PX1. Okay, let me hold these commodities X1 and X2, yes. Say P1 X1 plus P2 X2, something like this. But I'm saying X2 is one which is on my y-axis. Therefore, I have to make X2 the subject. Now, if I try to make X2 the subject, I have to be on this side here. I have now P2 X2 equals to, then I have W minus P1 X1, something like that. And if I divide through by P2, I have X2 equals to W over P2, now minus P1 over P2 X1. Now, since X1 is on my x-axis here, therefore, the whole of this becomes my slope. Therefore, if there is a change in the price of one commodity, therefore, it has changed this slope. For instance, if X1, if P1 and P2, P1 is the price of commodity X1, and then P2 is the price of commodity X2. If P1 changes, this slope has to change. I'm saying, take an example, if P1 over P2, now if P1, the price of X1, it has take X1, its price has reduced. Yes? If price has reduced, it means that this value up is going to be small, this value down is going to be big. Therefore, this slope is going to be small and the curve is going to be more elastic, as you are seeing that it's coming outwards like this. Now likewise, this price increases, therefore this price has increased, this price is constant, therefore this one is going to be small, therefore my goal is to shift inwards like this. This is the effect of price changes. There are two effects, yes. Now members, I think now we can dive now deep into what we call income effect, substitution effect, and total price effect. You've seen the total price effect has two changes, has the effect on real income and then has a change in slope. Now members, let us go through now what we call the income effect and substitution effect, as we saw in micro year 2 and yes year 1. Yes members, let us put off this. Now members, let me have introduced a concept called income effect. The income effect. Now we define income effect as the change, refers to the change resulting surely from a change in real income with respect to prices held constant. We are saying income effect refers to the change resulting refers from a change resulting surely from the change in real income, from the change in real income as prices are kept constant, with relative prices held constant. I think members, we have explained this the fullest. And then substitution effect. Substitution effect is going to happen. This results as a change in prices with real income held constant. This, I'm saying, this refers to, this results from the change in prices yes, as we held with real income held constant, with real income held constant. Now members, as we have seen this now, let us have now a diagram to show us this, and then we see how we can now relate to what we have been talking. Now saying income effect, as I've explained, that the total price effect is divided into two things. There is what we call the income effect. Income effect happens when there is change in real income as prices are kept constant, and then substitution effect, it occurs when there is change in prices as we keep the income constant. Now members, since I need a big space, now let me put off this first. Then now we go in for our diagram, and you see how the income effect, total price effect is divided into those three segments. Now, colleagues, let us have this diagram together. This graph. We have commodity X1, X2. This is our X2 here. This is our X1. You forgive me, the markers are somehow exhausted, but we shall keep pushing. I'm saying this is X2, this is X1, then this is our 0 point. Now remember, let us take a case of a consumer consuming two commodities, X1 and X2. What happens to him? What happens to him is that if originally he was consuming on this budget line W1, yes, and our indifference curve is that he was originally here. Now this happens when the price of X1 reduces. Now when price, let me use something different. You say when price of X1 reduces, as we say that when price of x1 reduces, what will happen? This will lead to a change in slope of the budget line, and then the budget line will shift outwards. So it will tilt outwards. Therefore, this will lead to formation of my new budget line to come outwards like this. Yes, to W2. This shows a change in income that I was originally here consuming some quantities of x1 and x2. Yes, members, okay, let me first show you what I want to show you. Like here, originally I was consuming some quantities of x1 and x2 at this point here, and then here. But now, since the price of commodity one, x1 and x2 has changed, what will happen to me is that I will be having more. What will happen to me is that I will be having more income with me, so that I can go to a higher indifference curve and then higher budget line, since there is an increase in income. Therefore, what I do, I just need to move outwards to come out this new budget line, my new indifference curve to the new budget line. If this is a IC1 and this is going to be an IC2, something like that. But now, members, take an example of you as a boss. Okay, you are an employer. In real life, is that if someone is well off, goes to a high indifference curve, this person is not going to be controllable. Therefore, what happens to him is that his boss will try as much as possible to bring him back to where he was, to the initial indifference curve. So the initial indifference curve, so as to manage him and for him to be controllable and for him to work well. Therefore, we shall always draw a budget line parallel to this new budget line that touches this new indifference curve, so as to bring him back to this original indifference curve he was on. Therefore, members, before I draw this, like I have to draw this again, but this indifference curve have to be done to both of these lines I'm going to draw. Therefore, first before you sketching this, you have to first sketch this line, which is tangent to this, which is parallel to this new budget line W2. Therefore, what I have to do is to also draw a line which is parallel to this one. I think this line is parallel to this one, and then this is our W3. And then now our indifference curve here we had before, it has to be tangent to both of these two lines. I'm saying we shall have some budget line, like it is tangent to this one and tangent to this one. It shouldn't be, it has to be tangent, just tangent. And then this is my indifference curve 1. Now, members, from here we have something called, like originally we were at this point here. Let's call it point A. As a result of price change, when the price changed, we went out to this new budget line, W2, and then we came to our new equilibrium, call it B. But now, since now our income has been reduced, our money income has been reduced to this point here, we come back to this point here, point C. And then we get to know that the difference, this reduction in the money income is called what we call the compensating variation, CV. Now, members, allow me to take you through what we call the total price effect, substitution effect, and income effect. Now, members, if you see that me coming from A to C, what happens to me that me coming from A to C is that I was originally consuming more quantities of X2 and less quantities of X1. But since my income has reduced, I have now to change. I have to substitute more X2 commodities for X1 so as to increase X1. Therefore, for me to be at this point here, I can reduce X2 and then increase X1. Therefore, the point from A to C is called the substitution effect. And the substitution effect always happens on the same indifference curve, as you have seen that on the same indifference curve, but I've come from this point A to this point C. I am reducing values of X1, also of X2 for X1. Originally, I was consuming more of X2 and less of X1. Now here I'm consuming more of X2 I'm consuming less of X2 for more of X1. Yes. Now, members, also if I come from C now to B here, it's what we call the income effect. Because we say that at this point here, at this down difference curve, someone is earning, has less real income as compared to someone who is up here. Therefore, coming from C to B is what we call the income effect. And then lastly, what we can talk about now, coming from A to B, is what's called the price effect. Because remember, at this point A here is when my price was small. This was a smaller price, sorry, a low price. Now when the price, I'm saying X1 reduced. This was when my price was high at point A. Now when things turned out to be like the price of X1 has reduced, I moved from this lower indifference curve to a higher indifference curve B, and therefore coming from A to B is what we call the price effect. And then likewise, it's going to be the same as having for me coming from A to B, and the same thing as having coming from A to C, then plus coming from C to B. Then where we have the total price effect equals to the substitution effect coming from A to C, substitution effect, and then plus the what we call as the income effect. I think members, from there things are still fine and we are still enjoying. For any questions, just feel free to comment into the comment section. I'll be able to answer to you members. I think you've also seen that I'm trying to answer your questions. Now from there members, I want us now to talk about what we call the Slat's equation, where we shall need to prove that total price effect equals substitution effect plus income effect. Yes members, I'm saying from that point, so we are going to prove what we call the Slat's equation. And then from there, we shall be able to appreciate that total price effect equals substitution effect plus income effect. Now, members, let me put off this and then I'll sketch some new diagram at this point and then we shall enjoy it. Yes. Now, members, I'm just doing the same diagram here, the same exact diagram that I've drawn, but now having also the demand function down. I'll have two diagrams in this format, two graphs in this format. Here you have x2, here you have x1, then here you have x1, then here you have the prices of x1. Here, this is my demand function, this is the price of x1. Now remember, as we said, originally, we are on this indifference curve, W1. Since there's a price decrease, we went to a new budget line, W2. But now, since we are now here, you have a high real money income. Therefore, what will you do? Your employer has reduced your income by taking off some of your income to come to the lower budget, to come back to where you were before. Now, from this point here, we can do our indifference curves. Like it was, our indifference curve was like this. I have point A, I have point B, and then lastly I have point C. As we say that coming from A to B, substitution effect, coming from B to C is the income effect, coming from A to C is the our total price effect. Now members, we also have, if we try to extrapolate these points here and we make something like drawing our budget lines here, we get to know that at a higher price, we have a higher price P naught, and then you have a lower price P1. Now what happens is that, remember here, at this point A here, the price was still high. Yes, I'm saying P0 is the higher price, then P1 is the lower price, as you see that price comes from 0 to upwards. Now remember at point A here, the price was high. Therefore, I have a point here. I call it point small a. When the price was high, I had a point A here. Now, when the price reduced of commodity X, my buy line shifted outwards to this point here, to point C. Therefore, this point C will happen when the price has reduced, quite small c. Yes, likewise, to have this point B is of a result of me doing what? Of me, yes, to have point B is of a result of me, my employer reducing my income to come back to my original indifference curve, but the price had increased. Therefore, also this point B is on a high, it is on this lower indifference my budget line, but the price has as a result of a price increase. Therefore, this also has to be at point B here, where there is a price increase. Now members, if I try to join these points here, I think, but anyway, I think you are following. I have this first point, then I also have, members, these are straight lines, but for mine, I don't have a ruler. Now members, if we go back to our Marshall demand curve and Hessian demand curves, that's where we shall distinguish between these two lines, these curves we've drawn here. Members, remember, for a Marshall demand curve, we say that a consumer is constrained with the budget constraint, but he wants to maximize utility. Therefore, this outer diagram here, because there is price change, so here the budget line is the same, because I've said the budget line is the same as this budget line. The budget line is the same, but just the first half is moving outwards. The first half is moving outwards. Therefore, we shall have our, we call this one our Marshall demand curve, which is a function of P and W. Likewise, we say now for what? We say for a Hessian demand curve, what happens to it is that we have a given level of utility, but now we're looking for indifference curves that is just the lowest indifference curve that's our indifference curve. Now here we also have the same indifference curve, but now we have budget lines crossing up along it. Therefore, this shows us the Hessian demand curve, and then this is our Hessian demand curve, which is a function of P and U. Now from this observation, we see that at this point A, both of them are equal. Now that's where our slats equation comes in from. Now at point A, what happens? At point A, here, both the demand curve, Marshall demand curve, and Hessian demand curve are equal. Yes, we are there, we are together. I'm saying at point A, both the Hessian and Marshall demand curves are equal. Marshall are equal. Therefore, if they are equal, what happens? It means that HI, like our Hessian demand curve with a function of P and U, is the same as having the demand curve, Marshall demand curve, a function of P and W. I think this one is now explained them already. But also W can be expressed in terms of P and U, which is our expenditure function. Yes? Now this is the same thing as having DI, a function of P, and then W, a function of P and U, which is our expenditure function. Now what we need to do now here is different with respect to PI, and then shall formulate our slats equation. Yes, members, I'm saying now this is the same thing as having HI, function of P and U, equals to now DI, P, now W into P and U, something like this. Now if I take the first derivative with respect to PI, what will happen to me? I'll have something like the HDI, I have something like the H, I, the P, I, the same thing as having the DI, the PI, something like that. Now plus, here now we use the chain rule to have the DI. Are you seeing there? To me, try to use a different marker. I'm saying here shall use chain rule. Shall have now the DI, the W times now the W, the PI. But remember, I think you recall in the previous video we said the Shepard's lemma, properties of exponential function. You have the Shepard's lemma. If I differentiate the exponential function with respect to P, what do I get? I get the Hessian demand function Xi. Therefore, this part of W, remember W is the exponential function. We said W is the exponential function. If I differentiate the W with respect to Pi, I'll have my Hessian demand function Xi, a function of P and U. I think of this term. Therefore, my DH, the PI, is the same thing as having the DI, the PI. Yes? Now, since now this, remember we said the W, the PI gives you the Xi, then I have now plus Xi, the DI, the W, something like this. Instead of the dw, the pi, or have xi, the function of p and w. It is my Hessian demand curve, and it is from what? It is from the Shepard's lemma, as we explained in the previous video. Now, members, here, me making my di the subject, I'll have something like the di, the pi equals, now, I've been on this side, I have now the hi, the pi, then minus xi, the di, the w. And then this is what we call the Slatsky equation. The Slatsky equation, now what does it tell us? It tells us that total price effect equals to substitution effect minus the income effect. Yes, this is our total price effect equals to the substitution effect plus the income effect, yes. This xi is just the quantity of xi that we multiply times changing the Marshall curve with respect to w, where we have the income effect. And therefore, from this, we know that the SAS equation just tells us that total price effect equals substitution effect plus income effect, as we saw in the previous diagram I've drawn, that I've put off from our board. Now, members, for any questions, just feel free to answer me, to ask any question I'll be able to answer. But I'm trying to say that the SAS equation helps us to explain this term, that total price effect equals substitution effect plus income effect. From our diagram, as we've seen that at this point A, everything is equal. So my curve is the same as the exchange is the same as the Marshall curves. And I think, members, from that point, everything is fine. Then remember, I think we can now conclude with. But now for here, what needs to be a takeaway, that total price effect always depends on the sign of the income effect. Now, the substitution effect is always negative because it is of a normal good. Substitution effect is negative because in order for me to increase one commodity of x1, I have to reduce commodities of x2. Therefore, there is a negative. I have to reduce something, so I have to increase something. Substitution effect is always negative. Now, what happens that total price effect is going to be positive if this one is bigger than this one. This is a positive more than this one. This is going to be positive. Now, if income effect is going to be negative, also this one is going to be negative. Therefore, members, try to take time and now read through and see what happens when how does total price effect, substitution effect, and income effect be in terms of size. But substitution effect is always negative. Now, members, lastly, let us talk about now what we call the measures of I'll call them measures of benefits from price changes. Measures of benefits of price changes, or welfare measures. One of it, we have change in the consumer surplus, what we call the Marshallian surplus. The other one we call the compensation. We call it the equivalent compensation, and lastly we call it the compensation, the equivalent compensation, and then the other one we call it equivalent compensation. Then the other one we call it the compensating variation. We have the equivalent variation and then the compensating variation. Now, members, I think now for this part is fine. Now let us go through the measures of welfare, welfare measures, or measures of benefit of price changes. Yes, members, saying that now I also talk about measures of benefit of price changes, about welfare measurements. We call them welfare measures, or measures of benefits of price changes. We said one of it we have the consumer surplus, and what we call it the Marshallian surplus. Then second, we have the compensating variation. And then lastly, we have what we call the equivalent variation. Now members, let's begin with the consumer surplus. Now for consumer surplus, what happens is that consumer surplus, remember as we know that consumer surplus is the difference between what the consumer was willing to pay for a commodity and what actually pays for the commodity. Therefore, it is the area above the price but below the budget, below the demand function for a commodity. Therefore, in order for us to measure the consumer surplus, we just need to have the Marshall demand curve, the region below left the Marshall demand curve, and then above the price, the consumer pays for the commodity. Now, from our diagrams we had before, we saw that. I think now here we're going to use less time. Yes, I'm saying that from the diagrams we had before, we had something like here you have x1, here you have x2. There is a price fall in x1, and here you have x1, here you have the price. We are still taking over a price increase, so a price decrease, where we shall always move outwards. What happens is that if originally here, we shall move outwards like this, and then we shall have also another byte line, which is called our compensating variation here. And then our indifference curves will be in that form, in the form of having here one, and then have point A, point B, and then a point C outside here. Then you have point A, point B, and then point C here. As you say that, we shall have also the equivalent demand function is here down. Now members, for as I said, at higher price, sorry for declaring this line here, but at higher price P0, our demand function was at point A here. We have this point A, and then at a lower price P1, we had a point B here and then a point C here. This is our point A, point B, and then point C. Now remember, I'm saying now this is the price that someone will pay for this account. Now for our compensating variation, we are talking about now consumer surplus one, consumer surplus, or the Marshall surplus. Is that we just need to now have the region, the area below our Marshall. Remember, this is our Marshall demand curve, a function of P and W. Area left to it, but above the price. Now, for us to have it, it's the same as integrating from P1 to P0 of our Marshall demand curve, which is DI, function of P and U. Now times dP. dP because we need to use respect to price. And I think members, for that part is everything is fine. Consumer surplus is measured. We say consumer surplus the difference between what the consumer is willing to pay and what he actually pays for the commodity. And then we say that consumer surplus is the region just below, like left of the Marshall demand curve, but above the price. And therefore, this is the region we want from P0 to A, P1, and then to C. Then this region you can get it by integrating from P1 to this one of this budget line, dP. That's our consumer surplus. As simple as that. Now, second, we can talk about now we said now our second part is going to be our compensating variation. Compensating variation. Yes, compensating variation from just what I've been talking about. We are saying compensating variation is that as the price of commodity X1 reduces, an individual will have more income with him. We have more money income with him. Like it's having more purchasing power of X1 commodities. As one has more income with him, therefore he won't be controlled and he won't be able to be controlled enough. Therefore, what happens that his employer has to reduce that money income so as to put him back the original difference curve he was in before. Therefore, the compensating variation refers to the amount of money income that the consumer has to be reduced with, so as to go back to the initial difference curve he was in before. Therefore, that is what we call the compensating variation. Now, how do you measure the compensating variation? And the compensating variation, since now we are on the same indifference curve, now we're going to measure it using the external demand curve. Therefore, from point A, I'm saying from point A, then I'll go to point C to our external demand curve. This is our external demand curve, HI function of P and U. So this is PW, not P and U, P and W. Now, what do we do now? Now, first measure the compensating variation, we just need to have now the region B, region above the price, but left of the Eastern demand curve, and that's where we shall get our compensating variation. Therefore, our compensating variation equals to integral from P1 to P0 of now the Eastern demand function HI of P U dP. As simple as that. I'm saying the compensating variation means that the amount of money income an employer has reduced from your income so as to put you back to the original income, the original difference curve you were before a price reduction. Yes, before the price reduction. And then let's let us talk about the third component was the equivalent variation. Now for equivalent variation, this happens, the third part is equivalent variation. Now remember, for equivalent variation, this happens now when now there is not there's no price reduction, now there is a price increase. Suppose the price of X1 increase, what will happen to our budget line? It will shift inwards. Therefore, this person's income will have reduced, and then this person will be able to consume less quantities of X1. Therefore, his income has reduced. Now, for him to go back to his original indifference curve, the upper indifference curve, now his employer has to add him some amount of money, enable him take him to the original indifference curve he was at, so as to consume the commodities I was consuming before. That was called the equivalent variation. Therefore, equivalent variation refers to the money income that an employer adds or has to give to the consumer, so that to enable him have or be on his original indifference curve as he was before. Now for this equivalent variation, now I think you just need another diagram showing now a price increase. Now for a price increase, I think things are also fine. We also have the same diagrams as we have. This is X2, this is X1, this is X1, this is the price. Now what happens is that originally I was aware of, I was able to consume, originally I was at this indifference curve W1. Now since price increased, what happened to me? The price increased, therefore I will be able to, price of X1 increased, therefore I will be able to consume less of X1. Therefore my budget line will shift inwards like this, at this new point here. Therefore, what happens if I shift inwards? Therefore, my employer. Now, if I shift inwards here, it means that my income has reduced a lot. I've been on high indifference curve. I'm coming to lower indifference curve. What happens is that my employer has to add me some money income to take me back to where I was. Therefore, I have to do a line now parallel to this new budget line that is going to be parallel to this new budget line like this. As we have that one, and then I'll be able to draw my indifference curves with ease. Yes, my indifference curves with ease. I think let me use the blue thing. I use blue. Yes, let me use blue. Originally I was at this point A. Due to a price fall, I came to point B here, but now at point B there, to show that I'm having less income with me. I have less income with me because I'm not able to purchase quantities of I was consuming before. Now what happens is that my employer has to add me some income that will take me back to my original indifference curve I was on before. Therefore, the difference here is what we call the equivalent variation, and then this is the point C where I have to go back where I was before. Now also here the prices, we have the same statements here. There's point B here, then there's point C which is in between here, and then there's this point A here. We have the higher price P0, and then you have the lower price P1. As we say that here at the start here the price was low. When the price was low, it came inside. There point A at a lower price here. This is the point A. Yes. Now point C is on a higher price because it's where the employer came in to add me income. I have point C here, and then I also have point B here, which is on a higher price. Sorry, this is the higher price. Yes, and then this is the point B here. Now, remember now, if we're talking about equivalent variation, I'm just talking about being on the same interface curve, and then that's what we call the fixed demand curve. Now, if I try to bring these 2 points here, I form my new fixed demand curve, H1, H2, let me call it H2 of P and U, and then equivalent variation is measured by having the area above the price P1, but left of the budget line, and then this is the area we want. And therefore, to get that area is just a matter of integrating from P1 to P0. Now of the new, you now have H2, now of P and U, then the P. Something as simple as that. Remember, I think now I've tried to explain everything. Thank you for watching the videos. Videos are interesting, I know. But I am in Shakano, your math tutor. For any questions, just feel free to comment in the comment section. We shall be able to answer. As I promised, also shall be having some physical discussions. Members, feel free to come and we enjoy the beauty of economics, mathematics at large, and statistics at large. Thank you for watching, members. Shakano is the name, and everything is okay as you have seen. Thank you for watching. Just subscribe, like, share, and comment for more videos like this. I love the way these videos are moving. People are enjoying the videos that I'm seeing, and I love the feedback. Members, thank you for watching. I remain Shakano, your math tutor. Likewise, and have a nice time.